This is episode number 30 with Veralyn Jones. Coming up.
And it was also very frustrating because every time I spoke, I would hear someone say, I don't understand what she's saying. What is she saying? I remember the very first time working with the LA Women's Shakespeare Company, my thought was, I'm going to go in there and they're going to wipe the floor with me for sure. In a sense, I always felt like I was behind the eight ball in all of this because I didn't have the training experience that most of these people had. I was learning as I was going. Sometimes you just have to just step out of your comfort zone. I think that's the main thing. I'm still learning that because I'm still really that frightened girl who's saying yes while I'm shaking in my boots. I'm a winner at what I do, even though it may not be all the great roles or the great theater stages to be on. I'm just damn grateful that I got a chance to do what I set out to do.
If you're looking for what it takes to be an actor long-term over the course of your life, then you've come to the right place and you're going to really enjoy this episode. Today's guest grew up on a tiny island in the Caribbean, studied fashion and dance in New York, often felt like she never had the right background or training, and yet found success in several careers. Hey there, this is Nathan Agan, and welcome to the Working Actor's Journey, connecting you with lifelong professionals. Today's guest is Veralyn Jones, an actress who has been working professionally for over 30 years across theater, film, and TV. She has worked at the Denver Center, South Coast Repertory, Mark Taper Forum, the Kirk Douglas Theatre, and internationally at LaScala Theatre in Stockholm, Sweden. This podcast is designed to show you how the work is done, what the realities of the working actor life are like, and to share all the different ways actors have come to this career. There is no one path and no single answer. We want to learn from all of those further down the road, to shorten the learning curve and to discover what helps and what doesn't when it comes to having a lifelong career as an actor. By the way, did you know you can support this podcast as a patron? Starting at just $2 per month, get exclusive access to behind the scenes and additional content and be a part of taking this show to the next level. And for those who join at the co-star level or higher, just $5 or more per month, you also receive a 10% discount on our workshops and programs. Head to workingactorsjourney.com/premium to join today, and thank you for your support. Our guest today, Veralyn, is an award-winning actress who earned a degree in dance from Brooklyn College. In addition to all her credits on stage and screen, she is a board member and resident artist at A Noise Within, a co-founder and artistic associate at Lower Depth Theatre, and a member of both the Antias Company and the Actors Studio. She has also served on the board of the Los Angeles Women's Shakespeare Company and mentored many young actresses there. I have definitely known of Veralyn for many years and been an admirer of her work. I'm so thrilled we could involve her in the workshops we've done and that I had the chance to talk to her today. Like me, you may be surprised at the many lives of Veralyn Jones. I just could not believe all the things she's done in her life while still also having so much success as an actress. And as you'll hear me say in the interview, I love her quality of just asking, how do I do that, when she's interested in something? It's so simple, and yet many of us don't do it. Asking that question can open up a whole new world, as she demonstrates over and over. I'm so grateful to Veralyn for how candid and honest she is. She really dives into everything, no holding back. She's such a warm, kind person. It's a great talk, and I really think you're going to enjoy this one. So here we go with episode number 30. Please enjoy my chat with Veralyn Jones. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. Sort of a moody day. What's it like in San Diego? Because here it's very gray.
It has been rainy. The rain is just starting. So yeah, it's been wet here. but we had like a rainy day 2 days ago, and then yesterday was kind of sunny, and then we have more rain today. So do you? I was talking to somebody yesterday. I don't think it takes a lot for me to get too hot. Like I always prefer to be in the sun, and I can get very cold very easily. And they agreed. And so I don't know. Are you more of a warm weather person, cold weather person? Do you gravitate to one of them?
Well, I'm more warm-blooded, I think. Cold, I get very cold, and I live in an old house. It's over 100 years old, so it's always drafty. And so when we're home, we're all dressed up, and then I go outside. It's like, hey, it's not that hot out here.
Yes, yeah. You go to take the dog for a walk, and you're like, wait a second, I don't need this heavy sweater outdoors.
No, not at all. Or when you start off early, all dressed up, and then by the end of the day, you're hot. Right now, I have a heater at my feet just to keep my feet warm.
Yeah, my brother, he just moved to Nashville, and he told me like he made 2 different trips to like Home Depot to get heaters because he moved from LA. He wasn't anticipating how cold it was going to be in the winter. So yeah, I know that feeling. And yes, I'm a little more bundled up than usual today. But now this was something this is what I love kind of getting ready for these interviews. I had no idea about where you started and where you grew up. And you started on the island of Carriacou. Am I saying that correct?
Carriacou. Oh, you did do some research, yes.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Tiny island. Yeah, it's called Carriacou.
Carriacou, okay. And so it's like just north of Venezuela and in the Caribbean.
It's on that chain, yeah.
Yeah, and so okay, so that's where you started. That's like how many years did you live there?
I was there, I think, up until 9. I came to this country. I was either 7 or 8 or 9 when I came here.
And so what do you remember? I mean, do you have a lot of memories of growing up on the island there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I really hold on to those memories because, the older I get, with family being gone and, the elders passing, we just don't get back to Carriacou as much as I would like. But, oh no, those memories are like locked in because those were the memories of my grandmother and my great aunt. And they were the 2 women that raised me up until I was able to join my parents again.
Okay. So were your parents on the island or what were they doing for work at that time?
Well, what happened, back in the day, England was supposed to be our mother country, so to speak. We were colonies of England. And so once you reach a certain age, everyone's hope and desire was to go abroad, to go to England, for school, for further schooling, because everything was limited on the island in terms of education. We got through what our grades were called standard. So you'd have ABC, which was kindergarten, up to 6th standard, which is the highest you could go. Okay. And which is really sort of like a middle school education. So to really go further, you either had to leave the island or, go maybe to another country or to a larger island that would have bigger institutions for school. So at the time when my mother was pregnant with me, prior to that, she and my dad were trying to get visas to travel to England. And in those days, it took a long time before, it could be years before you were cleared to get a visa. So it just so happened that after I was born, just as I think I was 9 months old, their visas came through. So the choice was to leave us. There were 5 of us. My parents had 5 kids at the time.
Wow.
The choice was to leave us and to go. And every time one of my uncles or aunts had the opportunity to leave, their children were left with my grandmother, who we called Mama Rose. So Mama Rose was everything to us. And along with my great aunt, her name was Isabel, but we called her Tam Bell. And she was an invalid. So my grandmother really had her hands full because she cared for my aunt. And I was the youngest of all the children in the yard. So I was like the prize child in the yard. And, growing up on the island we never knew, we didn't have electricity. We didn't have running water. So, it was just that kind of growing up experience. But, in our minds, we had everything. We had everything we needed. Wow. There were no shops where you would go necessarily, department stores where you would buy clothes. So everything was made for us. So when my grandmother, she was the salt of the earth to me because she made everything. I remember my parents would send fabric once they did get to England. fabric back for her to make our clothes. She made our mattresses. She grew our food. You know, I remember we had a cistern outside. So you know what a cistern is? Where you collect water.
Yes, yeah.
So,
I'm thinking of that reference in Othello. I think he says the word cistern, but that was the only one.
Exactly. It's a real thing. She would line us up and we'd all have to walk to the well and bring water back. We'd have our thing on our heads called which was a piece of fabric that you'd wrap up in a round thing, and you put it on your head to make it flat enough to put a can of, or anything that you were carrying on your head. And so she'd line us all up and we'd march to the well and get the water, and we come back and fill up the cistern. That took several trips, just so you know.
Yeah.
But that was my growing up, yeah.
And so was Mama Rose, did she grow up on that island, or where had she spent her life?
Now, Mama Rose she's a very interesting woman because she was a Scottish woman. Back in the day, the island, Carriacou was first dominated by the French. And over the years, then they took over. And so the island is really, all of the villages and the names and so forth of the village are all French. And I remember growing up, the older people, the grandparents, they all spoke this sort of different language, except what you call the patois. And it was a mixture of the different languages. And so, but my grandmother in those days, the Carriacou was known for sugarcane. So the British needed ships in order to transport all the goods back to England. So the Scottish people were known for years to be great shipbuilders. So a lot of Scottish people were brought onto the island to develop this shipbuilding industry. And so my grandmother's family came from Ireland. And that's how she got to Carriacou. And she married when the cane business went bust. A lot of the Scottish people stayed on the island. And then with the influx of the African slaves that were brought onto the island by way of Haiti to till
work the fields,
to sugarcane. So my grandfather was brought over from Haiti to do some work. And later on ended up meeting my grandmother, and that's how they got married. So my grandmother is actually a Scottish woman, yeah.
Wow.
Her name was Elizabeth McIntosh. She was a McIntosh.
Wow. Okay. We've probably spent 2 hours talking about that woman. That sounds like such a fascinating journey. So growing up on the island, were you aware of, or was there any tourism on the island? Were you aware that this was a place that people came to, or was it just,
No, at the time, Carriacou, and it still kind of is sort of like a hidden gem because the water is littered with small islands in that area, the Leeward Islands. And there are even islands there that's uninhabited. So Carriacou being as small as it is, it's like 11 square miles. So it's not very tiny. It wasn't on the tourism path, shall we say.
Okay, got it.
And growing up, even though my grandmother was a white woman, we never saw her as a white woman. We saw her as our grandmother. And living, growing up on the island, we didn't see too many white people at that point. So, but all of the grandparents at the time were the white people. They always mixed somehow because at that time there was a lot of intermarrying and so forth. But Carriacou is really sort of like, I know most people always tell me when I lived in New York and even out here, they'd always tell me I'm the only Carriacouan they know because it's a small community of people. Even back east, more so here on the West Coast, but back east, you'd find more, but it's a very small community. Everyone knows Jamaicans or Barbadians or Trinidadians, but Carriacou, we actually don't even have our own government. We are governed by Grenada.
Okay.
Which is, and the island that my father comes from is called Petit Martinique. And so that's even smaller than Carriacou. That's like, at the time, there were only like 600 people on the island.
Oh, wow.
So Carriacou is pretty small. And I think now people are learning more about it.
Yeah.
But most people, it's not on the tourists, which I love. I love that because to me, it always stays, and it's really changing a lot now. But at the time growing up there, we were like in a cocoon. So to speak.
Oh, right, of course. And you mentioned that language, the patois, and I know there are, having traveled a little bit in that part of the world, there can be so many influences on language that even when somebody is speaking English, it doesn't sound like English because because there are so many other cultures melting in and melding in there. And so were you speaking that kind of dialect and those kind of regionalisms growing up, or were you taught like, the Queen's English, so to speak, in school?
No, well, at the time I was so young, so we were. No, you really just learn your basics. No one is really talking about trying to change your dialect or anything like that.
No, but I guess it was more a question like, was there a certain kind of like, were there certain kind of regionalisms that you were picking up in terms of just all the cultures that are present in that area versus, like when I go to Belize, English is the official language, but there are people, speaking mixtures of English and Spanish and Jamaican influences in there too. And so, even when you hear quote unquote English, it's like, I don't know, there's a lot of kind of slang and other stuff that comes up. So I was just curious if that was part of your culture growing up.
Well, every island has its own, I think sometimes when people think of Caribbean dialect that it all sounds the same, but every island has sort of its own regionalism, I suppose, in how they speak. So it's not until you leave the island that you realize, oh, you sound different from somebody else, but it's not something that was consciously taught or anything.
And so do you remember at that age, there were certain things you were very interested in as a kid, like that you had proclivities for or wanted to pursue? I mean, like how wide was your knowledge of things to do at that age?
Well, growing up at the point when I lived on the island, I was so young that we didn't have museums or theaters or any such thing really. So it was nothing that I was exposed to. We didn't have television. We had a radio, and I remember my grandmother having a gramophone. So there really wasn't much to aspire at that time. It wasn't until I got to the States when we were brought up, when my family moved, when they went to England. First of all, they went to England. They did get there. Years later, England was very hard for them. So considering that was supposed to be the mother country, it wasn't welcoming whatsoever. So eventually they moved from England to the States with the help of a great aunt of mine. And they built their lives there. And then eventually they were able to send for the children. They left 5 kids with my grandmother. So they brought myself and my 2 sisters to the States first. We got here, I think, in the late 60s or something. And then later on sent for my 2 brothers. And then since we've had my youngest brother who was born in the States. So it was then that I, in being exposed to television, I had no idea what television was. And
so, and where did they bring you to? Was this New York or was there somewhere
Brooklyn,
else?
We grew up in Brooklyn. I remember seeing television. I remember getting to the apartment. First of all, just getting from the the airplane to the main building near the terminal. And in those days, and I'm telling my age at this point, in those days, there were no connection. You know how we now go through that tube and we get...
Right.
So the plane would land on the tarmac and then you'd have to walk from there to the terminal. And we had never felt cold. My sister and I. The coldest you ever felt was when you went to the ocean, to the beach, and you came out and you doodled for a little bit, and then next thing you know, you were dried off by the sun. Yeah. So being cold, and at the time we didn't have our coats or anything. So I remember the flight attendant wrapping us up in blankets, and since I was the littlest one, she carried me because it was snowing. We got here in December, and there was snow on the ground. And I remember walking, feeling the motion of the flight attendant walking, and I'm looking around, and the snow was falling, and I felt like E.T., being wrapped up in this blanket and looking around and feeling rather cold, but being more fascinated by the thing falling from the sky. It was just so fascinating. And then when getting to the terminal and seeing my parents, and then I didn't remember other than pictures,
Oh, wow.
I think they were away for almost 8 years before I saw them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I mean, and because there were probably no phone calls. There was no like letters, I would imagine, but
you know what it was? What's that thing? Telegrams.
There were telegrams.
That's, anything important and major came through a telegram. Or if someone was traveling abroad and was going to England and on their way back, people would send stuff, letters or pictures or clothes. And so they would bring stuff back. So that's really kind of how we got things done. But so it was fascinating, and just seeing these spaces. And in those days, everyone went to the airport. If someone was coming,
Right, of course. Yeah,
everybody went to the airport to greet them. So it was that kind of scene. And I remember my mother just grabbing me out of the arms of the flight attendant. And I was looking at, who is this woman? It's like, I know it's my mother, but it's, it's sort of like that typical immigrant story when you reunite with your family. And,
wow.
It's kind of even tear me up just thinking about it. But so that was that. So then getting home to the apartment, getting in the car, and because we didn't have any cars on the island. I think there were 2 as far as I could remember, and getting in a car and all these people making all this fuss over you. And me being the youngest, I was always kind of, the favorite child in that way. But then getting to an apartment and, buildings, tall buildings, and then the television was what fascinated me. I remember sitting looking at it and seeing people inside, and I thought they could see me and could hear me.
Oh, yeah.
It was really interesting. So then the things that interest me as I grew and got, accustomed to this box with faces and people moving around. And the things that fascinated me that I would see on this thing was when I would see these shows where people danced and, like what was the name of that show? Like even Red Skeleton,
Ed Sullivan and all
Ed
that.
Sullivan and so forth, and seeing these various things. And there were some shows, Tom Jones, he had a set of dancers who would dance. And that always fascinated me. That's really what I wanted to look at. And I think that's probably where my interest was piqued by things theatrical and so forth. So,
well, I can't imagine, coming to somewhere and like just everywhere you look, everything is so different than what you knew. And of course, again, as you were saying, like at a time when there was so little connection to the outside world, of course, now it's so easy to kind of see, what other people are experiencing or, whether you look at, videos or whatever. There's just all this stuff that you can show you just about anywhere you want on the planet. And so did you find it hard to acclimate to, going to school and making friends and just living suddenly in Brooklyn? I mean, what was that transition? I mean, obviously you were glued to the box, the TV, and that was comforting. But what was the rest of your life like at that point?
Well, it wasn't all that easy because going to school as a child who, first of all, was not familiar with any of it. School, what's this all about? From school on the island, I think, it was a small village school, so it wasn't a huge school. So in your class, if I remember, it was just small amounts, like 8, 9 people in your class, because there weren't that many kids at each grade level to have a full class. So. And it was scary. And it was also very frustrating because every time I spoke, I would hear someone say, I don't understand what she's saying. What is she saying? Or whenever it was time for me to read out loud, it became such an issue for me. I actually would kind of break into a sweat because I knew what I would get, oh, I don't understand what she's saying. And can she speak clearer? And what is that? She's, things like that. And, for a kid, that could be very traumatic.
Of course. Yeah.
And, it's interesting how things stay with you because even to this day, there is still that slight thing until I settle into what I'm saying or reading. It becomes a bit of a flashback of those moments. Yeah.
And, obviously it was just the way that you guys spoke on the island and the way you grew up speaking around your family and the community that, I mean, again, to these children in Brooklyn who are totally unaccustomed to that, it just sounded very different. But like you were saying, it was still English, but it just had a different ring to it or a different sound than they were used to. And so
the other thing that's really difficult, I think, at that time there weren't many Caribbean families. I think we were the only Caribbean families on the block. In my school, I believe there was just one other girl, and she was from Haiti. And so we were the only 2 that I knew well in the school that for sure that had these different backgrounds. And so even on our block, it was always the Caribbean family, thing. So, yeah.
So what did you find yourself getting involved with in school? Were there things you were gravitating toward, like sports or other things, or what? How did you, or were you just coming home every day and watching the TV?
Well, I did make some friends, but I think that happened not so much in elementary school. It was more when I got to junior high school. Then things, well, we called it junior high school. Here they call it middle school. But it was, basically, my block became like my world. So the friends that I made on the block, they were, you'd play outside all day. We jumped rope. We played handball. Any wall became a wall for handball. So there was, little, there were these trips where you go. We didn't, our family was really not very, I wouldn't consider us poor. We always felt, no matter what status we were at, we always felt like we had everything, but we really weren't in terms of the larger community. We really didn't have very much. So we didn't do a lot of outings and, our exposure to theater and so forth. If we go to a movie, it was minimum. So there weren't many outside curricular activity things that we did outside of playing on the block, quite frankly.
And, all your siblings, were you guys all fairly close in age?
Yeah, there were five of us when we lived on the island.
Right.
So I was the youngest. And then when we got here, my youngest brother, who was the only one born here in America, he's 9 years younger than I am. Okay. So in terms of my older siblings, everyone is pretty close to age, maybe a year or two between myself and the brother that comes before me. They're 2 years. And I think between him and my other sisters, it's really just a year or two between each of them. 2 years. And
did any of them end up in the arts or creative stuff or other fields entirely?
No. I was what you call the black sheep of the family. They had no idea what it was that, my interest in dance and theater. And that was so foreign to them because basically what our responsibility was to go to school, get an education, get a job. And that was it. There was no thought of, and the job basically in those days, at least in my family, most of the women worked in a hospital and most of the men worked in the tunnel, if you could understand that. They were called sandhogs and they worked in fixing the rails and, very dangerous, very, very dangerous work. As a matter of fact, I lost an uncle in the tunnel. He was crushed by one of those things. When the train isn't running, when they're trying to repair things, there's some sort of a trolley that goes through to bring their equipment through. And he was crushed by one of those. So that's basically the men did that. And it was easy because if you had one person working, they'd get the other person on and the other person on and so forth.
Right.
And then for the women, my mom worked at a hospital. And most of my aunts worked there. So that was they were nurses' aides and so forth. So they were not professional people in a sense, but they all found gainful employment.
Right.
And actually it's amazing to me what they were able to accomplish on what you would consider these minimal, these jobs. Right. And they were able to purchase their homes and get second homes and third homes and so forth. So that was it. But in terms of being exposed, but most of them weren't exposed to the arts. I got lucky. There was a department store in Brooklyn called A&S, and that was one of the premier stores at the time in Brooklyn. And they had an outreach program called the A&S Fashion Board. And they chose a girl. It was a community outreach type of thing. And they chose one girl from each high school and one girl from each junior high school to represent their schools at the A&S Fashion Board. And what the Fashion Board was, it was a fascinating time. I was so lucky to have gotten involved. And, you had to go down and, each school would send a few girls and they'd go down for interviews and then they choose one girl out of, the lot that was sent to them. And I got to represent my junior high school. And that just opened up my world. And this was for a year. So the whole year we had this amazing experience. We'd meet once a month and we would plan our calendar of activities for that month. And, we did all sorts of things. We'd go to orphanages and have parties there for the kids, like at Halloween or a senior citizen home for adults and go and we'd sing and we'd bring gifts and so forth. But then those were our community type things. But they would also take us on trips each month. So I got to I was selected, and even among the girls, you could sometimes be selected for special projects. And I remember being invited to go to the Plaza Hotel. They had this thing, 17 magazine did this thing called a think tank for young girls. And I got to go. So we had lunch at the Plaza and, we did all these things. And then we were invited to go to 17 magazine where we spent a day at 17. And this was with teen 17. And it was a fascinating day because we saw all the different departments and they showed us around and we had luncheons and it was really very special. So that was one of the things I got to do. I saw my very first play with them. We went to see Man of La Mancha. I'll never forget that. That was my very, very first. I was 14, my very first experience seeing theater. Wow. And again, that just opened up I was like, wow, seeing people on stage and they're telling the story. And, you have, people on horses and not real horses, but the stagecraft it was just people flying in from the sky, coming up from the ground. It was just it was quite fascinating. And that same year I was in junior high school also, we went to see a production of Hamlet. So in Connecticut. Okay. So that was 2 theater experiences I had at that time within that year. And that just kind of blew me away. So that was my first theatrical experience.
And you mentioned, as first going to school and maybe developing a little bit of shyness or anxiety about, speaking out. Mm-hmm. So that the A&S Fashion Board, was that something you pursued? Did your teachers recommend you? How did that come across?
It was by recommendation. They asked one teacher, usually a teacher that was like in the home economics or some, that type of teacher who would say, or the English teacher, somebody. I remember it was my home ec teacher that recommended me. I remember she sent three girls down and I got it. So that was that. I even got a chance to do an ad for 17 magazine. So and each time I would get chosen to do something, something always came of it. Another opportunity came because when I got the ad for 17, it was like, oh my God, it was just out of just being in the environment and being exposed.
Was it a print ad that you did for the magazine or
it was, I think it was attached to that think tank we went to at the Plaza Hotel.
Oh, cool.
And then there was some photos, of course, taken, of course. Something.
Yep. And do you feel like this was helping to develop your confidence, in yourself, overcoming any kind of those earlier issues that were coming up about just, speaking out in class or whatever, like being, did you, if you had a good relationship with that home ec teacher and this was just helping you come more out of your shell, were you feeling that at the time?
Oh yeah, each thing, because it always amazed me that I was chosen for one, and people always kind of looked at me in a certain way because I'll send her because maybe she can do it. I remember when I got to high school, that was another opportunity. I had a teacher who there was some sort of speech contest or something that was happening. And it just, in thinking of doing this with you, it just brought all this stuff back. I was going back in time. And I said, I can remember the speech contest. And this teacher, Mr. Stanley, he approached me and said, there's this opportunity to do this thing on the radio. And would you be interested? And I said, well, not knowing exactly what it entailed, I was, yeah, sure. And so we began to write this little speech, and then I had to, practice. I remember on my lunch hour, he was calling me down to his office, and we'd, go over the speech, and then going into the radio station to do it. And then I won it. So, again, it was like, okay, it was like always to me, getting into things through the back door, never with a specific interest to say, I'm going to do this.
Right.
These opportunities came, and sometimes out of nowhere. And so that's really how things tend to happen for me.
And, okay. So, with all of these opportunities that are coming up and, you're getting to experience, more culture in the fashion world, the theater and all this kind of stuff. Did you start, and with your earlier days of being really fascinated with television, were you starting to sense that this was something you wanted to do? Were your parents very supportive of these extracurricular activities, or was it still always, well, this is very nice, but you're going to eventually work at the hospital or something?
Yeah, and it was, to be honest, it was never a thought that I could do any of this or that it was something it was just something that fascinated me and interested me. So it was that, but I never had the thought, I want to do this. In some ways, I wish I had. And I think probably the reason why I never thought of it is because I thought, well, it's not for me, it's for other people, but it's certainly not for me because of my background and what's expected of me and so forth. So it was never anything that I said, oh, I'm going to do this. The one thing I did think I wanted to do, and again, it was because of seeing someone that was very dear to me exposed, fashion design, for instance. I ended up going to the High School of Fashion Industries. Yeah. And that came about. I have a cousin. Her name is Pearl. Pearl John is her name. And growing up, I thought Pearl was just the best thing ever. She was beautiful. She was so talented. And I remember spending the weekend at her house once, and she was sitting she went to Fashion Industries, and she was doing an assignment, and she was drawing this fashion, this figure of this woman in this beautiful outfit that she was designing. And I was so fascinated by it. And I said, well, what is all this for? She told me it was an assignment she was doing. And, she went to, I said, well, what is it for? She said it was for her school. And she went to the High School of Fashion Industries. And I was like, oh, I said, well, how do you get into this school? What do you have to do? Because I was about to graduate from junior high school, middle school. And I needed to choose a high school. And most of the kids were going right on to the neighborhood high school and so forth. And I thought, oh, so Fashion Industries was in Manhattan. And normally, I was still in my community. I was elementary school, then went to junior high school in my community. So going into Manhattan seemed fascinating to me. And at the time, we never went to Manhattan very much. And she says, well, it's a specialized school. So there's certain things you'd need to do, particularly if you're interested in fashion design. Now, mind you, I had no experience in it. I was never considered myself an artist or anything. And I said, well, what do I need to do? And she says, well, you're going to need a portfolio. And I said, well, what does that consist of? And she told me, she says, well, you have to do some still life drawing. And I said, well, what is still life? And so she showed me some of her things and, paintings of jars and apples and things like that. Of course, yeah. So I said, okay. And she said, you need to take a test, a math test. And I said, oh, okay. I was never really great at math, but all this was, but when you're young, you think you can do it all. So I said, okay. So I went home and I started doing just that. She had given me one of her art books and I would see some of the still life drawings and so forth. And I just sat down and started trying my hand at it. And so by the time it came for declaring where you wanted to go, and I told my counselor I wanted to go to Fashion Industries, and she also told me all these things I needed. By then I had already started acquiring some of that. Long story short, I went for I took the test because when you go in, you had to actually go there and there's a model there and you had to do a gesture drawing of the model. And, they call it gesture drawing just to get the shape and then so forth. So I went, I did that, got in. So I was in the fashion design program at the High School of Fashion Industries. Wow. That's where I met Mr. Stanley, where he then got me to do the radio thing and I did the contest and so forth. So that's how I got into fashion, but I was also fascinated by fashion. I love fashion even to this day. That's just something that's always been a part of me. So.
Well, and I'm immediately thinking of the photo I've seen. There's, I don't think it was Medea, but there's a production you did in the last couple of years, I think, and there's gold and there's red.
Oh,
and
that's when I played Hera in Argonautica. Yeah.
And I look at that and it's like, that's a very fashionable Hera. That is a very fashion conscious woman right there.
Everybody talks about that costume.
So in high school, then, had you kind of decided that you were going to pursue a career in fashion? Was this swaying your parents at all? I mean, were you looking at colleges and how did you make that transition?
Okay. So when I got to Fashion Industries, I realized that, first of all of the instructors at the time were these older Italian women, and they plucked them right out of the design houses to teach because Fashion Industries was a new trade school at the time. So not in my day, it had been going on before, but that's how Fashion Industries got started. They needed, because there are certain schools that were just for trades, different trades. And so New York being the fashion industry, they decided they needed a school dedicated to teaching the craft of the fashion industry, whether it be textile design, fashion design, illustration, merchandising. It's all of the what would fall under the fashion industry trade. And I did get into the fashion, which was the creme of the crop at the time, the fashion design program. So it was very competitive because everybody were fabulous. They were, these are the young designers. But the problem that I had with the school was that the instructors were not trained educators per se. They knew how to teach the trade. So a lot of them were very prejudiced, very, very, very much so. And they made it very difficult. You would submit work and you always got these grades. You said, well, why am I constantly getting this grade when it's the same grade each time? It's like, it was crazy. I even tested the thought because I knew that there was some, prejudice going on. I remember we would have to work on samples, like when you were being taught how to do a buttonhole or install a zipper or the different style sleeves or it just various little sample things.
Right, of course.
Do. Yeah. And every time I'd submit something, I got a 65. It's like, why am I getting this? Because I love to hand sew, and a lot of the stuff that they taught us, we'd have to do very intricate, hand sewing and so forth. And always the same grade. I remember telling this to my cousin, Pearl, who had years, because she was much older than I was years ago, and she kind of had some of the same experiences. But once I had her do the samples for me. I cheated. I had her do the sample we were doing, because you'd have samples where you just do straight stitching or you do zigzag, just different types of stuff.
Testing. Yeah.
And we had to do like it's like starting from small and going out and increasing your stitch as you go along. And they had to be exactly the same width, whether it's a quarter of an inch all the way around or half inch, but you had to keep that same measurement all the way around. And so she did the sample and I submitted it. It was perfect because she could build anything, this woman. What did I get?
You got a 65.
And it was this was always something. There was always something. And so that always made me uncomfortable. And at a young age, I knew that was a real thing. It wasn't in my imagination, to the point where I knew I had to test that by having my cousins to do the sample for me. So I experienced a lot of that stuff. And I noticed that a lot of the African American people in the school were always complaining about certain things when it came to they were just not taught how to teach. They just knew how to teach what they knew, which was either the design part of it or the sewing or whatever. So I left there feeling very not connected to the trade. And I went to Brooklyn College, and there wasn't much of an option in terms of where I would go to college. So I ended up going to a community school, which was Brooklyn College. And so when I got there, I didn't really know what I was going to major in. I didn't have a clue as to what it wasn't going to be fashion, because if I wanted fashion, I would have gone on to the Fashion Institute of Technology, FIT, or Parsons. And so those weren't options for me. So I went to what was available to me at the time. And it was at Brooklyn College that I remember when I was at Fashion Industries, I did see there was a little drama program, and I did see a play that they did of Our Town. And that was, again, I went right to that. It was like, it was really a good production, and I really enjoyed it. So that was always in the back of my mind. But even going to college, I didn't think that that's what I wanted to major in. What I was interested in at the time, because I did a lot of dancing, and I was exposed again in high school to this cultural organization that was at the school called Black Unlimited. And at the time, during that time, the 70s, it was very much Black people were getting into our cultural identity. We were relating more to our culture and so forth. So this organization, we did a lot of African dancing and drumming and so forth. And so I realized I was very good at that, and I loved it. And I became very involved with that organization and led it actually as I went on. And so when I got to college, I thought I was going to major in phys ed again, because I was very physical. I loved, thinking I can do all of that. But that really wasn't what I realized quickly. That was not my main interest. So I decided I saw a production from the dance department, and I ended up majoring in dance. So I did that. And again, if I was really interested in dance, I probably would not have gone to Brooklyn College for that. but
Right.
that was my exposure. That's where I was exposed to it. So I ended up majoring there. And I graduated with a dance degree.
So, I mean, I imagine you were, not only taking classes, but I mean, there were productions, there were dance productions that you were doing throughout school. So, you were, and do you feel like could you tell you had a particular skill or talent for like ballet or modern dance or that kind of thing?
Well, the program was basically, when you're studying dance at university, you have to sort of do a lot of different style dancing.
Of course, yeah.
My major was in modern dance. It was a program. Graham was the technique, Martha Graham. So and of course we had ballet and we had some jazz. Now it wasn't heavily related with jazz, but it was basically preparing you for what they would consider concert dancing, like joining a company or something like that.
Got it.
The problem with me is I started late, people always told me, and I think that's what got me into the department, always said that I had such a beautiful quality in my movement. But in terms of being really technically strong, that takes a lot of years and you don't really start that when you get to college. So it was, a lot of, again, as I said, a lot of how I came up in what I do is always through the back door because it wasn't, my main focus at 5 years old to be a dancer because that's what I should have been studying. I should have been in a ballet class, but it just didn't happen that way. So it was a rude awakening when I remember doing my first audition outside of Brooklyn College. And it was for, I don't even remember the name of the show, but it just showed me where I was at as a dancer. I remember some friends, because when you're in a program, they generally don't like you to take a lot of classes outside of where you study because they think, they're going to change your technique. It's not going to be what we're teaching you, blah, blah, blah. So we basically stuck to that. But then once we started, moving out of that, and going to see what was going on in Manhattan. And I went to this audition with some friends of mine from my program, and we went there, little black leotard, pink tights, the way we were supposed to dress. And we get into this rehearsal room, and as the dancers started coming in, I mean, the leotard was hiked up to the side, and they had these leg warmers up, and then this and that and the heels and, ballet slippers was the most we danced with as far as shoes are concerned. Right. And we immediately kind of looked around and we thought, oh my God. And then the choreographer steps into the room and he walks in there and he looks around and he says, okay, let's get this mess over with. And it was like, what have I gotten myself into? So that, again, it was like, the realization was like, no, this is not because we were never into jazz. That was not the program. The program was more, contemporary dance. But so I think after I graduated college, I continued to study. I actually auditioned for Alien. I got in on a scholarship there. Again, things just kind of happening. And I was with Ailey on scholarship there for almost 2 years. And then...
And I'm sorry, what does that stand for? Or what's Ailey?
Alvin Ailey, American Dance Theatre. Company Alvin Ailey.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, So I was on scholarship there. And there was a young man that I was dating at the time who was with the third company. Alvin Ailey had 3 different companies, the professional, then the Ailey 1 and Ailey 2. Ailey 1, you started growing up with the company basically in the first company. And if you, continue to grow, you go to the second company. And hopefully, if you're lucky, you get invited to be in the first company, which is the company.
Right.
So this young man I was dating at the time while I was there on scholarship, he was doing a show. He was also an opera singer, which was very unusual. He had this really deep, profundo voice and really beautiful voice. And he had been studying opera all along. And so, but he had this facility as a dancer and he was striking. So he was in this third company, and had he stayed, I think he would probably ended up in the first company. Anyway, he got this tour, and one day I just happened to go to rehearsal with him. And as I walked into the door, I noticed the director was someone I knew from not only fashion industries, but who I had followed into Brooklyn College. And because we just happened to show up at the same places at each time. And he was the director and ended up giving me a job.
Wow.
So I got my first tour. The show was called Moving On Up, and there were just skits and songs and dances from the 20s and 30s.
Okay.
And so he needed a stronger dancer. So I was hired as such. But we all had skits to do. And we all had these songs to do. Now, I don't sing, per se. I can sing with other folk, but that was my first time really having lines and having to say lines and,
Right.
So, and it was so fun. We traveled for 6 months all across the country. And so coming back, instead of looking to the trades for dance stuff, I started looking for, auditions for plays and so forth. And that's really how I just started with that.
And is this now like the mid to late 70s, somewhere in there? Or?
Yeah, early 80s. Yeah.
Oh, early 80s. Okay. And so you're in New York to early 80s. What were you doing for just a survival job or day job, just kind of putting things together?
Okay. So this was my lead into my next work adventure.
It's kind of amazing that you had so many different almost like career, you were all in on fashion and then all in on dance and now all in on theater. And now it sounds like there's something else coming up too.
Well, there is. And it's such a drastic change now.
Yeah.
Where I'm headed now. And I think partly why things went this way for me, I think when you're a kid and you lack exposure to things, you never know that you have the propensity for, you never know that you would be interested in it or that you could be good at something because I was experiencing stuff as it was happening. So while on tour, as the tour was winding down, because I had my own apartment at the time and loved my apartment, but I subletted that while I was on the road. So now coming back from the tour, everyone started thinking, oh, what are we going to do now? Show's over. Everybody's thinking about their next steps. So there was a young man in the show who said he was going back to the job that he did prior. And I said, well, what is it that you do? And he said, well, I worked for this company called A.G. Becker. And I said, well, what is that? He said, it's a investment banking firm. And I said, well, what do you do there? And he said, he's a cold caller. And I said, well, what is that? And he said, well, they give you a stack of cards and on the cards, they have all the information on all, people who are really wealthy people and give the industry what they did, blah, blah, blah. And of course, there's a phone number, to reach them. So he would just make the phone call. He'd get on the phone and said, hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm calling from A.G. Becker for so-and-so, Steve, whatever, and the name of the broker. And the hope was that they would get the person on the line so that the broker would be able to speak to them and talk to them and introduce them to their firm and what they did and blah, blah, blah.
Right, of course.
And all the services. So I said, is that it? He said, yeah. So it just so happens that the person in charge of the cold callers, as they were called, was an actor. So he hired all of his friends because the brokers always felt that the actors had a better presentation. They spoke better, blah, blah, blah. So I said, well, I need a job. Do you think I could get a job there? And he said, oh, yeah, Tony, he'd love you. So he hooked me up with Tony. I went down, hired me on the spot. I think I started the next day. I was like a bull in a china shop because I knew nothing about investments. That was just not within my realm of my experience. So he hired me. I got there. I was matched up with a broker, making these phone calls day in and day out. And I immediately got bored with that. And I was looking around and there was another job that I saw that, people were doing and mainly the women were doing it. And I said, well, I got interested in what they were doing. And their position was called a sales assistant.
Okay.
And the sales assistant's job basically is working hand in hand with the broker. And they took care of all of the accounts. They, once the broker opened the account, they handled everything from opening accounts, keeping the customers satisfied, providing them with research, name it, whatever was required. Sure. So I thought, well, this seems like a step up. So I asked one of the sales assistants that I became friends with, and I said, well, how do I go about doing what you do? And she says, well, why don't you speak to Eileen? She's in charge, and just tell her you're interested. And I said, but I don't have any experience. And she says, well, just tell her your interest and maybe she may, pair you with someone, that can train you.
Right.
So that's exactly what I did. I went to her and it just so happens that there was a team of brokers. There were two brokers who was about to lose one of their assistants. Each broker had their own and one assistant was moving on. So she said, well, the manager said, well, I'll put you with this team and their assistant who's very good. She could, train you but you could still be of aid to the team because they were very busy. It was a very, very busy team. Just the two brokers, but they were really very busy because all of these clients were like high net worth people. So, I mean, you had to cater to them for every little thing. So I ended up being placed there and I learned the business. Now, these two brokers, the minute the bell rang and the business was down for the day, they were out of the office. So they needed someone who could still put in late trades and do this and just take care of everybody. I wasn't registered at the time. In order to do trading and so forth, you had to be registered. So the next thing I knew, the guy that I worked for immediately, he said, well, Veralyn, would you be interested in getting your license? And I thought, well, okay. So in order to get your license, you have to be employed by a brokerage firm. So they sent me to securities training. Next thing I know, there's a school called securities training where people learn about the business. You learn about stocks, bonds, commodities, the whole 9 yards. And there's a very difficult test that you have to take called the Series 7 test.
Okay.
And it's very, very hard to pass it because there are all these different components from options to bonds to institutional this. So it's a lot of stuff. And I was like, I was never great at any of this math and all of that stuff. So the last place I thought I would end up would be in a position like this. So I went ahead, I took the course. It was several months. And at the end of it, you go to take the test. I took the test and somehow the gods were with me. I passed the test. So wow. I was now licensed to just trade stocks.
To do trades. Yeah.
So we left the couple that I was with, the two brokers. The guy that I worked with directly, he left the business. So he left all of his clients to the other woman, his partner. Her name was Marielle. Oh, I'm not even sure if she's still with us. Veralyn K was her name. And she was what they call a BITCH on wheels, but it was interesting working with them. But anyway, long story short, we left. A.G. Becker got bought out by Merrill Lynch. But they only bought the institutional side. We were in retail, just dealing with individual clients. So everybody in the retail side was out of work because Merrill didn't take them. So everybody was scamming around trying to figure out where they were going to go. So my broker, Veralyn K, got us a deal at Bear Stearns. You've probably heard of Bear Stearns.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So we left on a Friday, started work with Bear Stearns on a Monday. Now, mind you, I had never been inside the HR office at Bear Stearns because the deal was made. Because you see, once you are what they call a high producer, you can get picked up by anybody because they want all of your high-end clients to come along. So because her book had expanded in size because of the other broker leaving and giving her all of his clients, she looked like she was the big thing. So they picked her up like right away. So as I said, we left A.G. Becker on a Friday. On a Monday, we went over to start our career over at Bear Stearns. And
I want to jump in because what I love is as you've been telling these stories is that this quality of that you were always seem to be unafraid to ask, well, what is that? And how do I do that? And I mean, like that, but that leads to so many opportunities. I think there's a lot of people that don't even allow themselves to ask those questions, but, just being like, well, how do you get into that? Yeah. How do you do that? And I mean, even though you're saying like, you didn't know you wanted to do it, but there was a certain quality within you that, you were comfortable asking those questions at least.
Well, I'm a Gemini. I think that might give you some clue. I just have I just have a wide interest in a lot of interest in a lot of different things. So getting to Bear Stearns now, so now we're there in this plush office and it's this and so forth. And then I had to get licensed for another test I had to take called the Series 63. And the 63 gives you, because right now with the 7, I could trade, but in New York, the 63 allows you to trade in all the states. So that was the next test I had to do. My broker also did commodities. So, and the thing is, these brokers, the work is really all on the trading assistant because the bell rings and they're out of there. So you had to reconcile trades. You had to, it's a lot after the trade is submitted. You have to, make your reports and all that stuff. So then she wanted me to do the commodities, and that's where things ended for me there. It was like, commodities was a whole nother thing, even though quiet as it's kept, I was trading commodities when I shouldn't have been, but that's between me and you now. But anyway, at that point, I was still studying. I had found an acting teacher that I really liked. I was working with her, a woman named Dana Zella Alexis. I was taking classes with her. I was still taking my ballet class. There was a ballet teacher named Don Farnsworth in the ABC building. I was doing that as well. So
this is the period of your life where you weren't sleeping at all, it sounds like.
No. But who slept when you were like, in your 20s? Nobody slept.
In the 80s in New York, whoever slept, I don't know. It was all about like, let's make as much money as we can and let's create as much art as we can.
And I have to tell you, it was a fabulous time, for someone that age. Most of the friends I knew, they were all, bunking with each other and in an apartment and so forth. I had my own apartment in Park Slope, which is one of the nicest communities in Brooklyn. Sometimes within the company, they would have these contests for the brokers just as motivating things. And whoever was the biggest producer for the month, you can get limousine rides for a month. You'd have a limo service, pick you up, take you to work, take you out, whatever. And so we won a lot of the contests. So there were times, and sometimes my broker would, if she was out of town or whatever, my partner, Wendy, and I, she was Wendy Jones and I was Veralyn Jones. So there were all these little coincidences. People always thought we were sisters, but she was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl and I was the black woman, right? So, but we had a great team between the two of us because we knew how to cover for each other and so forth. Sometimes I'd have to leave a little early, still, doing that kind of thing. So, there were times when I'd get the limo to take me to work and we would trade off. So we had some of these things tickets for whatever hot show was coming up or the ballet or whatever. So there were a lot of, real kind of
perks.
Perks, exactly.
Yeah. Well, and did you see, all the ballet in the theater as just something you were doing on the side, or did you still feel like, no, that's where I'm going, or how were you kind of balancing it or managing it at the time?
To really be honest, I knew I wanted to continue to do these things, but I didn't ever feel, again, because I always came through the back door, I never felt really quite ready for it. Because, even though I was auditioning, I was getting little parts here and there, but these were like, more community type things. They weren't really big things. Yeah. So the biggest thing was being with Alien and being able to study there. But again, I didn't feel ready to make any big proclamations that I'm going to be this, it was just things that I did. Right. So I ended up visiting LA once, still working at Bear Stearns, and I had such a great time. I'd met a friend a good friend of mine in New York had a roommate who had just come to New York to do a Broadway play. Okay. And she was staying with her. And so she said, you have to meet, my roommate. She's just opening in a show. It was called Open Admissions. It was on Broadway for 2 minutes. So I went, she invited me to go. I went to see the show. We met up afterwards and she was so fascinated and I loved her. And we had dinner and we kept in touch even after she went back to LA. And when I realized I wanted to go visit, because she said, come out and visit. And I did go out. I spent some time with her, had a great time. And I saw the lay of the land. I saw, how she, the auditions and this, and it was just, she was the real deal. She was an actress. She was getting work. She had a breakthrough film and a film called Baghdad Cafe. And, so I saw, wow. So this seemed like doable. It seemed possible.
Right. Sure. Okay.
So I went back to New York and I thought, you know what? I think I like California. The weather was great. And then the beauty of it was there was an LA office. Bear Stearns had an LA office.
Oh, okay.
So I immediately went to my supervisor in New York and I said, I'm thinking of relocating to LA. And there is an LA office, and what's the potential of me transferring to the LA office? So she immediately put me in touch with the branch manager in LA. I spoke with him. He wanted to know what my interests were. I told him I wanted to come out. At the time, they didn't have anything because it's a much smaller office than the New York office. So he said, well, you're still an employee of Bear Stearns. So if something opens up here, you would be, first in line to get a position. So I said, okay, good. With that promise, I thought, well, I'm going to make the move out there. I took a leave of absence. I think I had like a 3-month leave of absence, which was perfect because I knew at any time I can get the job back. And it'll give me a time to come out to LA, get acclimated, learn the lay of the land and so forth. So I did just that. So when I went back, I gave myself 6 months to prepare. Shocked my family because there was never any thought of one of us leaving, the state where we all lived. So I did just that. I moved out. I stayed with my friend for a while, and then I got an apartment and sharing with another actress. And I did this for, I think in LA, in New York, I was with Bear Stearns about 8 years in New York. Wow. And so in LA, I think I was with them for about 4 years, because the beauty of being in the LA office is that we worked on New York time. So when the market closed in New York, I started work at 6 a.m, but by noon I was done.
Wow.
So it was the perfect transition. But the kicker was my 3-month leave of absence didn't turn out to be 3 months. I was told once I got to LA to stop by the office just so that the LA office could meet me and that sort of thing. I did just that. The first week I got there, I did exactly that. I said, let me get this out of the way so I can get started in LA. I called up, I made it up, I went in, I met the manager there. He took me all around, introduced me to all the different people and blah, blah, blah. Then I went to the HR person there, and she gave me a Thomas guide. She said, so this is what you do. She even gave me the name of a temp agency in case I needed, something to do before I got a spot there with them. So I left. I was feeling great. I thought I did my duty. I can go because I had saved a lot of money. So I knew I would be fine for a little while.
Right.
As I was leaving her office, there was a woman who was coming in just as I was leaving. And so we just acknowledged each other and I kept going. So I went downstairs. My friend was waiting for me. She picked me up and we were off. So she took me to Malibu and we went all over the place. And it was just fantastic. And just knowing for all these years I had this job that I didn't have to worry about it. I had 3 months. So it was great.
Right.
So we got back to her apartment and she says, oh, V, there's a message for you from your company. And I said, oh, really? So I called back. And the lady says to me, the manager, she says, Veralyn, she says, I know we said there wasn't anything for you right now. She says, but something came up. Right after you left my office, something came up. You remember the person I told you that I clocked as she was starting? She was one of the trading assistants for an institutional broker. And she came down to request a leave of absence because she was burnt out.
Oh, wow.
So guess who got her job? So here I was, my 3-month leave was out the door. I think I started the very next week working. So here I am now back in a full-time job. But again, the beauty of that is that I got out of work very early. So I was still able to go off and do things. Mm-hmm.
And then, so, you start doing auditions. And I just wanted to kind of jump ahead a little bit. So, because I saw you got some work on Seinfeld pretty early on.
That was my very first job. Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, it just came, from auditioning and all that kind of stuff.
No, I'll tell you how that one went. The very first play that I did in LA was The Bacchae at the Odyssey Theatre.
Oh, okay.
And there was one of the women that was in the cast. Her boyfriend was an actor, but he was also a writer. And he had written a play and he asked his girlfriend if she could help him cast it. And so she asked me if I would read one of the roles. And I said, sure.
Mm-hmm.
So the reading now, during the reading, as it turns out, we did the reading. It was fun. And that was that. The very next day, I got a call from one of the other ladies that was in the reading who said to me, oh, Veralyn, is it okay for me to give your name to Mark Hirschfeld? Because he asked me about you. And I said, well, who's Mark Hirschfeld? Because I wasn't even aware of all of the casting people at the time. And at the time, Mark Hirschfeld happened to have been one of the biggest casting people in the industry. And she invited him to see her in the reading.
Oh, okay.
He ended up asking her, how do I get in touch with that actress, the black actress that was in the reading with you?
Yeah,
I was the only one, so it had to be me. So next thing I know, I get this call from Mark Hirschfeld himself, not even his assistant, saying that he had seen me in the reading. He loved what I did, and he's got a role that he thinks I would be great to read for. And I said, well, what's the show? And he said Seinfeld. Now, Seinfeld at the time was the hottest ticket in town.
It was a big show. Yeah,
I was blown away. So I went in and I read for it. And I remember when I read for it, I remember the response in the room was this big outburst of laughter. And I was like, what is it? I left the audition. I was tingling all over because it just felt so good. It was the character's name was Renee. And Renee was a friend of Elaine, the female character on Seinfeld.
Yes,
The episode was called The Orgasm. And so I got booked for it. I went in, I did. It was my first, I was terrified because it was my very first, experience.
And you're on the set with some, these major people.
Imagine that, right? And I felt so intimidated, and it was live and all of that, which was so nerve-wracking. Wow. But I did it. And again, when I did the line, it was this uproarious laughter. I was like, the audience reaction was insane. I was like, really? So the line was, Renee, I'm passing Elaine's office. And she says, Renee, can I speak to you for a minute? And I said, sure. And she says, well, let me ask you a question. She says, have you ever faked it? During.
Right. Yeah.
And my response was, sure. And she says, well, like when? And I'd said, oh, well, if we had some really good seats at a Broadway show, or if I just want to get I'm tired and I want to get some sleep. And somehow that was like this major thing, I guess, the way it was done. So that ended up getting me a recurring on the show. I remember when I went back for the second episode that I did, one of the head writers came up to me and she was telling me they got letters saying how happy they were to see Elaine with a friend. Because all of the episodes, it's always her and the guys, her and the guys. Yeah. And they wanted to expand her world a little bit. And so they decided to throw in a female that, co-worker. And that was me. So, and at the time we didn't see too many women or black people on the show, period. Anyway.
Sure, of course.
And so that, I guess that really kind of opened their eyes. I said, oh, well, yeah, she needs some friends. She needs to have, so that's how I got on Seinfeld.
And did you, again, you mentioned like it was your first show, you were very intimidated, but did you find it a welcoming set? Did it feel like something, okay, I want to keep doing this, or,
Hell yeah.
Money was good. You got a good reaction from the crowd.
And not only, getting it the way I got it, didn't even have to
of course.
do, trying to get in to see the cast in person, trying to get them to give me the audition. It just came to me in that way. And then, thinking I'm going to do one episode and then, I got a call for another one and then another one. So it made me think, oh, I could do this. And it felt, when it was right, it felt so right. I mean, the audition, as I said, when I left that first audition, it was such a feeling. It was quite an experience, and it made me think, oh, I could do this. It was the first time I actually felt honestly to myself that I could do this.
And did you have an agent prior to that, or did that all come?
I didn't.
Okay. So everything came after Seinfeld, just being able to book more work or going for more, just having more auditions and things like that. Yeah. You just started to show up on more people's radars.
Yeah. Yeah. And the same thing kind of happened, with theater.
Well, and I know just a little bit later, I noticed it was actually really cool because I know you're married to another actor and he's also a director as well. But I saw that you guys worked together twice, relatively early, like in 99 and 2000, you were doing both episodes of City of Angels and ER.
Mm-hmm.
And here, at least with both of those shows, you again have some really strong actors and really strong performers, and especially with ER, a very established show and all this kind of stuff. And it was on City of Angels that you guys played husband and wife, right?
No, it was on ER.
Oh, yeah. ER. Okay. Yeah. And so were those opportunities just coming from agents, or how did you guys end up playing husband and wife on that show?
We had two different agents, and still I was struggling with agents. I never at that point felt I had really good agents, but I did get that through my agent. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you guys ended up playing husband and wife on the show, was that just luck? Was it happenstance, or was there a conversation at some point with the writers, or how did that?
We went in, his agent submitted him and my agent submitted me, and we both got the audition. And then when we got there and they realized we were actual husband and wife, I don't know if that made a difference with them, but we went in not through the same agent.
Oh, okay. And do you feel like you took anything away from those two shows, The City of Angels and ER, just because of how established they were and the quality of actors that were on them, and then probably also the writers and the showrunners? Do you feel like you took anything away from them in terms of your view of the industry, of what you were seeing, how they were working, or anything that you used in your own career?
Well, every time you go on set, you learn something, and it's always an exposure because you get to work with DPs, you get to work with directors. And sometimes, you watch and it's just good to be out there, to be seen and to get to know who the players are. And then each time you get on a set, you learn, at least for me, it's each time, because it's new people, new directors, new everybody. So each time you get on a set, it's almost like learning something new and taking in different things. So it was just a fascinating thing for me, again, because all of this is relatively new to me. And so I just took whatever I could take whenever I can get it, really. So.
And so was it after Seinfeld that you felt like you wanted to make more of a go, like you wanted to be even more committed to acting and leave the financial or, the stocks and the trading behind? Was that?
And I think when I decided to move out here, even before getting, Seinfeld or anything like that, I think the idea when I decided to move was because I wanted to pursue that. And I knew in New York, there were those opportunities. And because I had a friend here who was very much a working actress, I felt that I could learn more from it's almost like having a mentor, someone who knows the industry. And she kind of helped me quite a bit in terms of knowing who the casting people were. Because in those days you were actually, when you had your 1,500 photos that you were supposed to have, doing mailings, you had to mail your stuff out with letters to casting people, trying to get them to bring you in on stuff. So, I was learning that that's kind of how you have to do it, particularly if you didn't have representation or good representation, which I didn't have at the time. So a lot of it, for a lot of actors, when they're trying to break through, there's a lot of legwork you got to do, trying to send out, keeping your photos out there, circulating, and hoping that a casting director is going to call you in, or that's really how you get in if you don't have an agent.
And were because it looked like, you worked, fairly steadily in TV, through the 90s and the early aughts and all that kind of stuff. Was that enough to keep you financially going, or had you built up enough with the stocks and trade, or were you still trading or whatever?
While I was doing both, because even when I did the Seinfeld thing and all of that, I was still working. I think within my office, they were so tickled that I did this. And I first mentioned, because there were times when I'd have to fly in a little bit earlier than when the bell rang or whatever for an audition. I just was a little lucky. They were just kind of intrigued by, what I did.
Oh, sure.
And so, but then when I got the Seinfeld, well, that was it. Because at the time, most people were watching Seinfeld. It was like the best thing. So that gave them, a little more confidence in me that, oh, okay. So if I said I had another episode, sure. Yeah. Another episode. Sure. So, that allowed me that. But I actually left the business after a while when I had gotten the first agent that I thought that could really help me, I think that's when I segued out of investment banking. I actually made a move from Bear Stearns before resigning the business to another firm I was recruited by another firm called Donaldson, Lufkin and Jenrette. I don't know if you're familiar with that company. They're now at Credit Suisse, First Boston, something different name now. But at the time, they were Donaldson, Lufkin and Jenrette. And I remember getting a call from a headhunter asking me if I was interested in making a move because I had left. I was working institutionally when I got out here, which was not my thing in New York. It was retail, but I was working with an institutional broker and we dealt with all these major institutions. So at that time, I needed more time that was a different kettle of fish working institutionally. Because even with the market closing, you were still dealing with these big hedge funds who still needed you constantly and so forth. So that was getting a little much. So I thought that was a chance to kind of segue out of investment banking. So, but then I got the call from the headhunter to go to Donaldson, Lufkin and Jenrette. And there was some monies involved in it. And I thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't walk away right now. So I went there and I stayed maybe about two years, I think, there. And finally, I said, okay, this is it. Because I was working with a very difficult broker and I just couldn't handle it anymore. So he was a gambler. I was working for two brokers that were one was an alcoholic. The other one was, what do you call it? He had a problem with gambling. And he
compulsive gambler kind of thing?
Yeah, he was churning. There's a term called churning. He was churning the client's accounts. Churning meaning that he was constantly trading these accounts with no investment principle involved. He bought a stock today, he'd sell it the next day. And that's not, portfolio building when you're doing that. And he was just churning the accounts for the commissions because every time you trade, buy or sell, he was getting a commission. So he got pulled into the office. He was let go. He lost his license. And I was being called in constantly to have to explain what he was doing and what the reasons behind this trade and why did he do this. And it was like beyond it just wasn't me. And the other one being an alcoholic, it was just much. So that was when I said, you know what, let me just see if I could really just do this. And so I retired from investment banking.
And so the work that you were getting as an actor, through the 90s, that was enough to sustain you, in terms of just living as a working actor. Was that, were you able to do that?
Oh my God, there's yet another term.
Oh, really?
I was living high on the hog at the time. I was, making a lot of money. Did
you become like an astronaut at this point, Veralyn? What are we going to uncover now?
An astronaut. No, because I, as I said, I lived very well. I was able to travel and do all these things.
Sure,
I bought a house, it was all these things going on. So I knew whatever, I'd never waitressed. I'd never done any of those things. So
sure, yeah.
I didn't really know how to do any of that kind of stuff. So I was always trying to figure out, well, how will I be able to maintain the livelihood that I've, given to myself all these years.
Yep,
that
sure.
I couldn't. And then I had this mortgage because I had a house and all that. I bought it with my husband, of course, but still, we had these things. And so I was wondering, well, what to do? And I used to really take good care of myself. I get massages and this and that, the other. So, every couple of weeks I had my masseuse and I going, and he was just wonderful and I loved it. And so one day I asked him, he told me his story once. He used to work in medical records at a hospital. And I knew every time I went to see him, I was plopping down $125, because he'd come to me or I'd go to him, but I was paying him money by the time I could it. And I said to him, well, how did you make this change from being a medical records guy at a hospital? And he said, well, this was it. I decided I wanted to, have my own business, have my own time, because for me, having the time was always the thing. Even if I was getting off work early in investment banking, it was still sometimes I needed to go earlier and I was always trying to find a way out. How do I get out to do this audition or whatever? So my goal at this point was to find something to do that I would do it on my own time and I would still be able to make a certain amount of money. So guess what I did?
It sounds like Veralyn became a masseuse.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I did research, but I did not uncover any of this. This is amazing. All
well,
the
that's
different
the kind of stuff that wouldn't be on IMDb.
well, I know, but this is like the secret life of Veralyn Jones here. It's just like, oh my goodness, from the tiny island of Carriacou to, these four or five very different careers across the country.
I know. It's just how things happen for me. And so I did that for a couple of years. And, I made money because I was very good at it. I was I always had these really big hands and strong. I was always very strong. And I took a course. He told me where to go to take the course.
Yep, sure.
I took the course. I got licensed and I went to, the Peninsula Hotel.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, well,
and then you went back to all your Bears and the Stearns friends and said, now come to me for your massages, right?
You got it. So that
yeah, exactly. Like any freelancer, you go to the people with money. You say, okay, I know you got money, so come on down.
There you go. And so I ended up also working at a friend of mine used to work at the bar at the Peninsula. And I don't know if you know, the Peninsula is this big fancy place in Beverly Hills. Really nice place. And so, sometimes after work, it was right there in Century City, which is where Bear Stearns was at the time. So when the Peninsula was opening up, a friend of mine from Bear Stearns, she told me that she was invited to go to view get a tour of the hotel and went to the spa upstairs in the spa, and they had a beautiful luncheon and so forth. And so I was looking around the spa and I thought, they do massages here. Hello. And so I was able to get on their call list. So if someone needed a massage, they'd call and say, can you do this? And so I'd go. And I can't tell you all of the amazing people I've met, because all the big folks,
of course,
the big, everybody would go through and stay at the Peninsula Hotel. People coming through from New York, wherever they were coming from.
Sure.
So I became good friends with Elaine Stritch as a result of that. Yeah. She was out here doing a film, and they called me once to see if I would be interested in doing a massage. And I said, sure. And I got there and it was her. And she was just the most difficult person in the world. But we'd have these great conversations and sometimes after the massage, I'll sit there, we talk, and she says, oh, honey, look in there at that fridge. And she was diabetic, so she had her own little fridge set up in the room and all. And there's a thing there, bring it out here, come, let's have a little talk. And we'd sit and we talk, and there any number of people I could talk about that I've met there. So I've had tea with the Saudi princess, cool. I've had this, I forget her name at this point, but she was a journalist in France, and she had a whole suite, and she had all her friends, and they were having dinner one night, and they invited me to stay, just things like that, So that was just another, but I did that for a short while. And then after that, I just kind of, winged it from there. No more new jobs. I can offer you that.
Well, okay. So just, I know, maybe we're around the same period. I was reading about the lower depth theater, and I couldn't tell, was that started in like 2005 or, I know you did a production in 2010, but did you start it in 2005?
Well, we started talking, a couple of years before the actual thing, because we had to go through the processes of figuring out what we were going to be and
forming
so forth, and getting our nonprofit and all of that. So the first production was around 10, I think.
And so where did that need or desire or vision come from in terms of forming that company?
It started with my husband and a couple that we know who happen to be partners in the company with us now. Just conversations about roles that we wanted to play, that we wanted to do, or we were interested in the classics, but we wanted to find these adaptations of the classics. And not just do them as they are, but to find these interesting adaptations. The very first play that we did, for instance, was called Three Sisters After Chekhov. And it was written by a Caribbean playwright by the name of Mustafa Matura. And he translated, it was the sisters going to Cambridge instead of, going to Moscow. So it was a beautiful adaptation. So that was really our interest. We thought we could find these adaptations. And because we are people of color, we wanted, to do work that kind of was inspired by the classics, but to make it so that we could see ourselves through those lens, the lens of color.
And things that I imagine, we're not seeing elsewhere, and we're not seeing opportunities for yourselves to do elsewhere.
Exactly.
And what I thought was particularly interesting about the Three Sisters after Chekhov, like you said, it had this Caribbean setting, but it was also, it looked like it probably would have been like maybe your parents' generation, the women you were playing. And so, like, were you like, did you feel like reading this, like, I know these people? Like,
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. For sure. So that's where we started. That was the idea, the genesis of the company. But in terms of how, I was always interested. I used to watch a lot of the BBC production.
Oh, okay.
And that was really the type of programming I enjoyed. I loved it. And so I was always fascinated by literature and text, when you hear these great words and so forth. So it was fascinating to me I didn't think I could ever do that, because I didn't think I had that bone in me to be able to do that, but it was something I was interested in. And so that's, I guess, the genesis of why we wanted to start the company. But in that time, I think the way I got kind of hooked into theater in LA was, it started with the Bacchae when I did that at the Odyssey, but it was, I met like Jeannie Hackett. You know who Jeannie Hackett is?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I'd learned about Antaeus. Let me just put it that way. Yeah. I'd learned about Antaeus, but I didn't really know anything about who was involved and so forth. And a woman that I worked with, Fran Bennett. I don't know if you're familiar with Fran Bennett.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I definitely know of Fran's work.
Right. Yeah. So, but even going back before the Antaeus people, my husband, Greg, was doing a film with one of the women who worked with the LA Women's Shakespeare Company.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And she had mentioned a play that they were doing, they were going to audition for. That's what it was. They were about to audition for Hamlet. And I had never really done Shakespeare, but it was something that I was interested in. So I went in and I read for it. I remember it was the weekend we were moving into our house. And so everything was packed up. I had no clothes. I think I ended up going there when I realized, oh my God, this is what I have. And I ended up going to the audition. And when they ask you, well, who are you interested in reading for? Being kind of ignorant to what they were doing at the time. That is the LA Women's Shakespeare Company. So I could go in and ask to do any role. But of course, what did I say? Gertrude, because, I figured, okay, that's what you do. Yeah. Anyway, I went in and I read for Gertrude. And then they asked if I would read for Claudius. So they gave me the side. I think I went back and I read for Claudius. Next thing I know, they cast me as Claudius. So that was my first experience with really working with the LA Women's Shakespeare Company. And through the LA Women's Shakespeare Company, because Fran Bennett was a member of the company, and she had mentioned something about Antaeus. And again, was like, what is Antaeus? And so, I learned a little bit about it. And then she told me, oh, well, it's a company of very seasoned actors and, they're just, wonderful actors and so forth. And I think I went to see something they did and I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of what I want to do. This is excellent, excellent. So I think I'd asked her to help me get in or to be introduced or whatever. That never happened. What did happen, I was Lisa Volpe, I'm sure you know her. She was invited to attend a meeting when Michael Ritchie from The Taper first came in. Prior to him coming, The Taper had all of these workshops. There was the Latino lab, there was the Asian lab, there was the Blacksmiths, which was the Black lab. So these were places that nurtured new playwrights and so forth. I had I did a reading or did one of those readings through their Blacksmiths component. And that's how I got my equity card during that job.
Oh, okay.
So Lisa could not attend the meeting that Michael Ritchie set up because what he did away with all of those labs. All of the labs where a lot of actors got a chance to meet new writers and to work out and so forth. He thought that they weren't doing what they were meant to do, which was to get productions to go to the main stage. And so he just dissolved all of them. It was a big blow because that was a place where a lot of actors got a chance to work out. It was like a theatrical home, which I had felt privileged to be a part of, having done that very first reading, and as a result, doing more and getting my equity card from there. When I came to LA, I already had my SAG card, but I didn't have my equity card. So I was kind of devastated that these things happened. But anyway, so he decided he was going to involve all of the local theater companies. And he wanted he invited all of the artistic directors to attend this meeting where he was supposed to explain his raison d'etre for doing what he did and to tell us what he hoped to expand the program to. And so Lisa Volpe could not attend that meeting. So she asked if I would go in her stead. And I went in, and of course there were all these ADs, and I, of course, I'm not an AD, but I was in on the conversation and so forth.
Sure.
While there, of course, who was at that meeting, because they were one of the prominent smaller theater companies in town, was Jeannie Hackett and John Amicello. So after the meeting, I happened to have said something at the meeting, and, I kind of challenged Richie a little bit. And so everyone was kind of like, oh, okay. So at the end of that meeting, I get this letter from Jeannie and John saying that, it was nice meeting you at the meeting, and we were wondering if you would be interested in being a part of the company. And tears like that. Now, here I was trying to get in before, no entree in. And at this meeting, this is how I meet them. I still have the letter that they sent. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, really? And so with that invitation, I said yes. And I think at the time they were doing it like you could, try it out for 6 months. And if you don't feel it. So of course the 6 months came, and then I was asked, well, do you want to continue or what? And of course I said yes. Right. So that's how I got involved with NTIAS.
And I was doing stuff at NTIAS like from like 2004 to 2008 or 9, somewhere in there. So I remember some of this stuff. And Lisa Volpe actually directed me in a production in college at USC of The Winter's Tale.
I see.
Yeah. And it was funny that you brought up that meeting with Michael Ritchie, because I did notice, and the way you were talking about all the programs that ended at the Taper, because I noticed later, probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years later, that you got involved with Equity when they were doing away with the Equity Waiver program in LA. And, just looking at these opportunities, like, this is how a lot of actors develop their craft and stay active and keep active. And, I think it's commendable when people will step forward and volunteer their name and be willing to say, like, no, I want to raise my voice here on this issue because I think it's really important for me to do that. And I've noticed that, like, you're also on a number of boards for different things, or you have been on boards. So where did that, like, that desire come from? Like, do you see that tracking from, you as a kid, like always wanted to be part of things, or how did, that advocacy point?
Being a person of color, sometimes you just got to be able to step up and say, you've got to have a voice somehow. And those were, and these were things that I just never, again, looked to do. It's just that the opportunity arose, and it's either you step to it or you don't. I could have said no to NTS. I could have said no to the equity. I could have said no to all of that. But, living in real time at that time, you had to, I felt it was just the next step in what I was doing. So that was a no-brainer to be able to say this, something needs to be said on the conference.
Right. I was really curious, because of how fascinated you were with the BBC stuff and the language, and mentioning that thing you did as a kid, having the anxiety around speaking. Was that ever something that you consciously worked on, like that kind of, and you mentioned Fran, but did you ever work specifically on your voice and elocution or anything like that? Or did that just develop over time in terms of you being very comfortable, on stage and having and developing that muscle to work with classical texts?
I remember when I was in college, I remember taking a speech class, and I realized in that speech class that there were certain words that I would say that wasn't how most people would say it. So, it kind of brought that to my consciousness. And so I think that's probably where that started, and just being fascinated with what I was looking at, in television or even the movies that I liked. It required, a certain attention. So working with Fran was very helpful. Working with the women, with the other women, and to learn from her was probably the best thing, you can do. She certainly is missed in this community, that voice and that ability that she had. So I think that came early in my transition to Los Angeles. So that was, again, it was just never to me a lot of conscious thinking about things, but just doing, so that I think might have stirred that for sure, working with Fran and with Leeds, and then just seeing, the Antioch people doing their thing and being a part of that community. A lot of times you felt you just had to step up to the plate. I remember the very first time working with the LA Women's Shakespeare Company, my thought was, I'm going to go in there and they're going to wipe the floor with me for sure, because, these people are from this conservatory program and that conservatory program. So, there were people who had studied, extensively and came out of prestigious programs. So in a sense, I always felt like I was behind the eight ball in all of this, because I didn't have the training experience that most of these people had. I was learning as I was going, so to speak, learning on the spot. So that was really how that came about, and feeling that I had to just keep doing it so that I could learn it. I could get used to it. But there's always that thing inside that's still, from way back when, how I remember this woman told me once, this Armenian lady, it was, what did she say? How did it go? Your memory is what you can't forget. And so your experience is good or bad. That becomes your living memory. That's what you carry with you all the time. Right. So I guess that thing of being made fun of in school and things like that, that's still, those things are hard to forget, to let go.
Right. Of course. Of course. Was there a point that, I mean, because it's been so fascinating to talk about your interest in fashion and dance and your work in finance. Was there a point where you, and then as a masseuse, and it sounds like you were very accomplished as a masseuse as well. Mm-hmm. Was there a point where you felt like, did you feel like for yourself, you had achieved success as an actor? Like, was there something that you were like, okay, now I feel like an actor like all these other people that I see, or no?
And I think that has probably been one of the things that I think personally have sort of held me back, if anything, because I always felt like I wasn't good enough in it, because I didn't have the background to it. So it always kind of made me feel like I had to work harder to get to like, if I'm in a show and whatever, it's because it wasn't my background. Your background always is informs you. It helps you because you experience certain things. And I've never really had that, the type of training that most people think is what you need to get you to the door. But I realized for me, that's just not my experience. So I have to just accept where I'm at with it and don't let that stop me, even though it scares the hell out of me, if that makes sense to you.
No, it does. It does. And I think it's a really refreshing perspective, because I think there are many of us who wish, I wish I had gone to this school, or I wish I had had this experience at a younger age, or I had been introduced to this or that or whatever. And just seeing, because of course, from the outside, looking at your career and how established, I perceive that you are, and in terms of the work you're doing and the quality of the work you're doing and the level of work you're doing, that you've been able to achieve that, even with the myriad experiences you've had over your life. I mean, I think it's really a testament to, drive and tenacity and perseverance. Just kind of wrapping up here, because there's a lot of other stuff we could touch on, specific projects and things like that. But do you feel like this place in your life, if you look back over the last few years, is there like a new belief or habit that you feel like you've developed that has really improved your life in terms of maybe your acting career, or just your focus, or things like that?
Yes. I think what I've learned is that I have to face my fears, because even though those things scared the hell out of me, I always said yes. And so, and I either had to learn on the spot or, get myself out of things. But because because you can always say, because I'm afraid I'm not going to accept this, so I'm not going to do it, I'm safer if I don't do it. A lot of times I had to literally pull up my big girl panties and say, yes, I'm going to do this. And I think that's where the opportunities came, because I found that when I did say yes, it opened a door And somehow I was able to scale the wall and succeed at it, because even working on Wall Street, that was the last place I would have ever found myself, because I was never a numbers person. I was never a math person. I would never, but when they said, we want you to get licensed, it was like, I could have said no, and that would never have happened for me, because it was a choice. I could have said, oh, yes, I'd like to. Maybe I shouldn't, but I do want to see what this is all about. And if I hadn't said yes, I would never have learned the business. If I didn't, say to Lisa Volpe, no, I don't want to go there. I'm not an artistic director. I'm not going to go to that meeting. Why send me to this meeting? I'm not an artistic director. There were all these artistic directors there. I said yes, and I went. And then, and tears came up. And then, other situations happened. Even, we're working with A&W now. It's like, I always thought they were not, that was not a place for me. And then I go there, I do one show, and then I end up doing another and another. And then I'm asked to become an RA, and then I'm asked to be on the book. So again, if you say, sometimes you just have to just step out of your comfort zone. I think that's the main thing. I'm still learning that, because I'm still really, that frightened girl, who's saying yes, while I'm shaking in my boots, but, saying yes nonetheless. So I think that's the main thing I learned about myself. And then I think that's what kind of propelled me to walk through these doors that I never knocked on, or would have knocked on if the opportunity hadn't come.
Well, I think all of the different careers you've had, it shows how you were willing to work hard. And I'm sure you took, different lessons from all of them. Like even all of those years, doing the stocks and trading, I'm sure there are certainly maybe not direct skills that you would take onto a set, but just life skills or things you learned about how to manage your money or whatever things, you became a numbers person, you became a math person.
Absolutely.
That only helped you and aided you. And then of course, like just having that business background, bringing that into running your own theater, being on the boards of other theaters. So it's like, it can feel really challenging at the time, but when you look back, you can see, oh, okay, this helped me. This helped line things up this way, or I never would have had this opportunity come up if I hadn't said yes. So yeah, no, I can't tell you how fascinating it was to learn about your life, because, again, I have a lot of research in front of me, but there was so much I had never uncovered. And this was great. So thank you so much, Veralyn. I really appreciate you sharing so much about what you were doing and what you've been up to.
It's fun. It was kind of making me have to look backwards, which was kind of interesting to know, because now that you say all of this and I'm telling you all of this, it made me realize, wow, that was quite a circuitous route to get to where I am now. And I'm grateful for all of the opportunities I've had. And I kind of have to always keep myself open so that more things can come, because that's, but what I realized too is everybody's path is different, and not everyone follows that same path. And mine certainly was different. And I just want other people to know, even if it's young people, to know that even if you don't start with one thing, there are ways to make things happen that's not in the conventional way, but that's okay, because you still end up in the same place. Because I still end up thinking, sometimes I'm working with the Yale rep folk, folks who love Yale, the Juilliard. I'm in the same room with a lot of these people. Yeah. So just because you didn't start that way doesn't mean you can't end up at a place where you want to be. And I think that's the lesson that I've learned for myself, and that everybody's path is different, but you can still end up in that same room with the person who had a whole totally different experience. So. Right.
And so, you've done, you've worked in TV and film and theater, and you've achieved a lot in your career. Is there, you've been on the boards, you've helped start a theater. Is there still something, or, what do you see like as the next challenge for you? I don't know if it's a specific work or piece of material or something that you're, really looking forward to tackling next, or is there a whole other career you want to start on the side? You want to become a marine biologist or something?
That astronaut thing sounds interesting.
Okay, well, yeah. See, we're all headed to Mars anyway. You can pave the way. You can ask somebody, how did you get started in being an astronaut?
Well, there are roles. There's certainly some roles I want to tackle. Some of the big roles. I've always been interested in doing Mary Tyrone in Long Day's Journey, and
sure.
I did a reading once of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which fascinated me. So that's another role. These, it's in my mind, these are just always the roles. When I say I think of those roles, these are the things that I always, it looks real hard, but it looks like something that I could give myself into, that I could do, given the opportunity to do it. So.
Well, and it sounds similar to, or at least from what I read about when you played on Esther and Gem of the Ocean, something that just requires so much of you.
Yes. It's funny because my husband always says, you always want to do these big roles, but they're roles that a lot of people normally wouldn't see me doing. Like playing on Esther, you think of this, probably an older person, a bigger person, because sometimes I get, these things when I didn't get a role or something. I remember a casting director telling me once as I was about to leave the room after an audition, it was a street mom or something. I don't remember exactly the role, but it was a role that you probably, it was sort of a street mom. She was a tough, woman. So
okay.
And she said to me, because, I can tell when I'm succeeding in the room, because it's a feeling I get that it's feeling right and I've dropped into it. And then there are times when I know I totally did not get this. And, if they offered it to me, I'd say no, because I didn't do a good job, whatever. But she said to me, Veralyn, I just want you to know, my hand was on the doorknob ready to leave the room. And she says, I just want you to know that you're not going to get this job. And it's not because you did not blow me away in this audition. It's just because you're not who we're looking for, the type that we're looking for. And oftentimes I get that. People, I'd read for something, they said, and I can tell this is not your role because that's not how they see you. So to get a role like on Esther was, again, it's the language. I mean, she has so much to say. But that's really what I want all those things to say. I want to be able to really have those words drop into me so that I could do them effectively. So a role like Mary Tyrone, I mean, these are roles that require so much, psychologically, emotionally. And I think that's where I've always wanted to be. That's why when I thought of, doing classical work, it always seemed like that's what one needs to be able to drop into these things. And so, yes, and doing on Esther was a life changer for me. I remember when I was cast to do it and I posted online that, oh God, I'm doing, on Esther. And a friend of mine, I don't know if you know this actress, Michelle Shea, she's considered to me one of a Wilsonian actress because she's done a lot of original work that she did the role that I just finished doing, Louise from Seven Guitars, which is another one of August Wilson's plays. So she, and those actors, because of the language, there's a certain way that you have to do these lines. August Wilson has his own, his own thing and rhythm. Exactly. And without that, you're lost. So you can't get through all of that text. You just can't if you're doing it at this slow pace. But she replied to my post saying, oh, she congratulated me on the role, but she also said, well, in order to play on Esther, you must be called to do the role. It's a calling. It's not anyone who could do this. So it freaked me out completely. I know she did it as a compliment, but it totally freaked me out because like, my God, maybe I'm not called. Maybe I'm wrong.
Right. Exactly. You start wondering like, was that, do I feel, it's a question of like, is this love? Is this what I'm supposed to feel like? Is this what love is? Is this the calling? I don't know.
Exactly. So, and that brings me to the point of feeling for a long time of being a fraud because I didn't have the conservatory background. I didn't have all of these Broadway experiences or, working with the great director. I didn't have all of that. So in a sense, it always kind of makes you feel like maybe I'm a fraud somehow, but I had to learn to get over that and still, do the work. And so that's doing on Esther. It's such a huge impactful role that I was scared that I would not be able to tap into what that is. I mean, we're talking about a woman who holds our history, you know, the African American history, because that's what she's a historian. She's the pulse of so much. And she appears in so many of August's work that it's a pivotal role that all of his plays hang around. So that's a huge responsibility. And then I got what she meant, Michelle Shea, when she said, you have to be called to do this. And when I was, cast to do it, and I started looking and reading a bunch of things and seeing some other attempts at the role. And, you know, there was some that was just like, oh my God, that was not a call. And you did not get that call at all, you know? And then there were those that I saw that was like with Felicia Rashad. And I thought, yeah, she was called. And I was so nervous that I would come off as not being called to do this role, you know? So it meant a lot to me to really dive into that and to really dwell in that world with her and to make her a whole, you know, 285 years old. How do you play that? You know? So it was monumental and it really was excellent. It was one of the most profound experiences I've had. And so, which led me to the last role that I just did of Louise. And so, you know, again, you just have to, if you get the call, when they call and tell you, you just got to show up. You got to show up.
Well, and I really appreciate you going into, you know, your experience of that role. And, you know, looking at some of the other shows you've done, I also have to commend you on being able to maintain a relationship with a husband who's also directed you in some of these parts too. It's just like, that's a whole other, you know, hour-long conversation of, how do you, you know, you're married to the same person who's a director and he's also an actor. He has his own career. And so there's probably lots of conversations about that and what do we do here. And then of course you're a part of this theater company together. And yeah, it's just, it's amazing to see how much you guys have intertwined your working and personal lives, and that you've found a balance, I'm sure, through a lot of trial and error of how do we make this work, and, you know, where do we leave work? You know, when do we leave work at work, and when do we bring it home? And, you know, are you going to cast me in this show and all that kind of stuff?
People always ask me that, and they ask him the same thing too. But, you know, there's just so much respect for him and the work that when we're in the rehearsal room, there are very few people, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but I don't think anyone has ever said that we made a spectacle of us working together. We just,
right, of course, yeah. You don't bring the personal relationship into the rehearsal room at all.
Not at all.
No, not at all. But do you guys ever bring the rehearsal room back into home? Or have you been pretty good about keeping that boundary?
No, of course we would bring it in, you know, in terms of discussions and where you see, you know, how, you know, how am I doing? Am I getting there? You know, that type of work is always there. I think it would be hard not to do that. But, you know, Greg is such a talented, not only actor, director, you know, teacher. So, you know, I've learned so much from him, and talk about a person with a drive. I mean, you can't find another person with the type of drive that my husband has. But no, it's always been a good working relationship. We've never come home where we're angry at each other. Or I mean, there are times when, you know, I would think, well, you know, you didn't give me enough time for this, or, you know, those type of little things you work out. But in terms of me blocking him off because I was angry at him for something or whatever. Right. No, not when it comes to the work. That's always separate. Yes, I could be pissed off at him. I could, you know, all that stuff. But
of course,
when it comes to the work, we've always managed to make it work. And I really hope, and I can't find anyone who would say that they find it a problem working with us as a team and as an actress, director kind of thing. And I've never felt that in the rehearsal room. And so I'm hoping that that's always been the case. We try to keep it professional, you know, and it's not even something you try. It just happens naturally.
Right. Well, like you said, the trust and the respect and open communication too. I mean, you know, you gotta be able to talk about stuff that, you know, if you need something more here or whatever, you know, and you guys have been working long enough that you kind of know what you need as an individual, and then what you're looking for from the other person.
Exactly.
Too. So, cool. Well, Veralyn, thank you so much for today. I really appreciate it. This was great.
It was great chat. It was actually so fun, actually. I thought it was going to be a whole different thing, but you're easy to chat with, you're very charming. So it makes things easy and you ask great questions. And I respect the fact that you take what you do so seriously, the research, and even the fact that you do this, the podcast, and not just the podcast, but what you do with the studio that you do the workshops.
Yeah.
So it was my pleasure, actually, Nathan.
Oh, good. Well, and thank you. I mean, I know I could probably pinpoint it, but I'll just say, like, the short answer is I feel such gratitude for a lot of the older actors I knew when I was in my 20s. And I think even at that time, I recognized a lot of my peers were not hanging out with this group of people, and we're not getting to work alongside this people and learn from this group of people. And, as I got older and as I get older and kind of that part of life, not necessarily the mortality of life, but just things become sharper in terms of where you've come from, what, the influences on you as a person. And so just seeing like, well, what can I do to share what I learned from this generation and the generation before me and all that. So, and I mean, I feel honored, to do it. And I love having the conversation. So, I mean, I think it is important, and your story is such a great example that, there is no one path. I mean, even I remember interviewing Dakin and everybody is always, people get winded going through his bio. Like you run out, you don't know how one person was able to do all of this. And yet he has such a story where he's like, and he even said, he's like, I hate to give people advice. He goes, because my path was so random and but I think your story is another great example that it's just like, yeah, you don't need to have gone to this school or done this thing or done this program. Like if you want it, you just keep working at it. Not everybody's going to get the lead in a TV series, but that's not the measure of success.
Right.
It's just what quality of work are you doing and that you want to be doing for yourself.
But as you say, the level of work, it's like, even with this circuitous path that I took to get where I am, I'm just so grateful. And I don't have this huge career either. I mean, I would love to do much more in every aspect.
Sure. Yeah.
Theater to the film, TV. But I am so grateful to be where I am from where I started. So to me, I'm a winner at what I do, even though it may not be all the great roles or the great theater stages to be on. I'm just damn grateful that I got a chance to do what I set out to do. And it took me, and I would still to this day say if I had to give advice to any young people, it would be to study. Yes, I think that's important. That is important. And I would recommend that. But just because you can't afford to go to an Ivy League, a conservatory, whatever, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't go for it.
Yep.
So, but that's what I will leave on, is just to say that, yes, my path is what it was, but it's what it was supposed to be. And doing what I feel I was meant to do. So that's my prize.
Hey there, this is Nathan one more time. Thanks so much for checking out the episode today. Please remember to subscribe so you don't miss anything ahead. If you enjoy what you've heard, please let others know. Write a review, post on social media, send an email, tell your entire acting class, or just a friend. I sincerely appreciate it. You can tag us at WAJ Podcast on Instagram and Twitter. We're also on Facebook and YouTube. I'd love to hear what you think of the show. Be sure to check out workingactorsjourney.com for our show notes with additional info and links mentioned in this episode, as well as all the episodes. We've got 25 plus interviews and 12 plus workshop presentations. Sign up for the email list so you're the first to hear about upcoming projects, workshops, and much, much more. Thanks again to today's guest and to everyone that makes these episodes possible. And a special thanks to you for listening. I'm Nathan Egan, and enjoy the journey.